through the airwaves and all around the world. You're listening to Mr. Scott's podcast.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Mr. Scott from Mr. Scott's podcast. I hope you guys are doing well out there. I'm doing pretty good. I just had myself a deviled egg sandwich, and it was pretty tasty. Now, as a born-again Christian, I'm not sure I'm supposed to be eating sandwiches called deviled egg sandwiches. I mean, is that okay? Is that in the Bible? No. All right, anyways, on a serious note, today I'm going to share the testimony of Karima. She comes from a Muslim background, identifies herself as a former Muslim who is now a born-again Christian. I thought it was a blessing the first time I heard it, so I'm going to share it with you guys. So this is Karima and her wonderful testimony. Let's get right into it.
Hello friends, welcome back to Live Chat with me, Karima. I am so glad you're here. So today I'm going to share with you my testimony of how I met this amazing, loving God who loves me unconditionally and who has changed my life forever. So I was born in Morocco. I grew up in a Muslim home speaking Arabic. Our way of life and culture, it is very different than it is here for sure. I grew up watching my family pray 5 times a day. I watched my family do Ramadan, which is fasting from sunrise to sunset every day for 30 days. And then we had a big feast every night. I did not have to do Ramadan because I was young, but I sure enjoyed the feast. When you are born in Morocco, you are born into the religion of being a Muslim. Everything you do, is centered around the Muslim religion. It is who you are, it is your identity, you speak about it every day. Thankfully I didn't have to practice, and do Ramadan and prayers and things like that because I was a young child. But I did have to read the Quran in school and remember certain prayers. Matter of fact, I have one that's, engraved in my head, and I still remember, even though it's been 36 years that I left Morocco. My parents divorced when I was 2 years old, and I lost my dad when I was 10. My mom met my wonderful stepdad, who was French, and we moved to France when I was 12 years old. France living is definitely very different than it was in Morocco. I mean, I grew up in a very conservative home in Morocco where you didn't even see, a couple kiss or hold hands. Even in the movies, you would see a romantic scene and 2 people would come really close and talk all romantic and stuff, and all of a sudden the scene would just stop. So I was definitely very sheltered, as far as the outside and kind of see, different things, from other countries and things like that. We just didn't see a lot of stuff, It was mainly just whatever was going on in our home, as far as being a Muslim and our culture and things like that. Anyway, so in France it was very different because when I showed up, it was like, whoa, what a shock. It's a very open country, and you see people half naked just in commercials, so I was definitely in shock for sure. But the one thing that really got me was the fact that there was churches, cathedrals all over France. In every village there's a cathedral, but yet you don't never hear about God. You never hear about Jesus. You never hear about religion, and in my house, my mom, even though she was Muslim, she didn't really practice. And my stepdad, I found out later he was actually Catholic, but he never practiced in front of me. So I grew up in a home, with 2 different cultures, 2 different religions, and there was just no unity there as far as the religion part of it. You don't know which way to go. So as a child, it can be very confusing, and I went up to my mom and I've asked her, what should we do? Now I'm old enough. Should I go ahead and stop praying? Should I do the Ramadan? And she was like, you're okay, you're a good person, and as long as you're a good person, you'll go to heaven. And so I just believed her and went with that, but I never really had peace, even though, I believed my mom and I trusted my mom and I loved her. I just never had peace about that decision. I had never celebrated Christmas or Easter in Morocco. So when I moved to France, we celebrated both holidays. We had a tree, my mom bought a tree, and there was this little house under the tree with a man and a woman and a baby and animals. And I thought, oh, that's so cute. And then we had presents, and I thought, oh, this is nice. I like this kind of holidays. And, I didn't realize the whole time that the little house was the manger, and it was actually baby Jesus in there, and Joseph and Mary. And then Easter came, and we did the egg hunt, and I got chocolate bunnies, and again, I was super excited, but I was never told why we had Easter, and so I was just excited to have those kind of holidays where you eat chocolate and get gifts, because we didn't have those in Morocco. We have 2 holidays in Morocco, and we have the first one is called L'Eid Saghir, which is the small holiday, and it is a celebration after Ramadan. It's a big feast, and you all just sit down with your family and have a big feast. And then the second holiday, it's called L'Eid Al-Kabir, which is the big holiday, and that's when we sacrifice a ram. My grandparents would, and my family would buy a sheep, and we'll have him for a couple of weeks in the house, and I make friends with the sheep, and I think, he's a pet, and then the next thing you know, he's gone, but my family would call the butcher on the day of the holiday, and he would come to the house. Everything is style, obviously, but he would come to the house, and he would put that sheep right in the center of the house, and that's it. He's gone, and that's the sacrifice they did every year to celebrate that holiday. So there was no chocolate bunnies or presents in our, holidays. At age 18, I was given the opportunity to come to the US and work. Unfortunately, I found myself in a very abusive marriage. I was young and naive, and like many nights, I found myself on the couch one night crying, thinking, what just happened to me? Why am I here? Why is this happening? But there was this sermon on TV. This man was preaching, and he was at the end of his sermon, and he said, bow your head, close your eyes, and pray with me. And, I just remember I was so desperate, to just find answers for myself, for my life, for what was going on in my life at the time. I didn't have any family here. I didn't speak the language. And I was very lost. And so I prayed with him. And I think that was one of the first seed that God planted in my heart, as a Christian. Nothing came out of that right away, obviously, but over time, I left that marriage, and I was able to get away from that, which I'm going to do a video on that. I'm going to share my whole story about my 5-year marriage that I had, where I was abused, and how I overcame it. I believe that it's going to be very helpful to many women out there who felt trapped in the same situation I was in. But thankfully, I was able to leave the situation. After I got divorced, though, even though as the years went by, and I had a job, and I had a car, and I had my own place, I still felt lost. I would wake up in the morning and go, what am I doing here? What is my purpose? Like I couldn't understand why I felt the way I felt. I just had no peace whatsoever, but God had a plan, all along. Everything that went through, everything that, that happened to me, He had a plan for me. As time went on, I had many people invite me to church. Over time, just everybody's like, hey, come on to our church. And like, no, I'm good, thank you. And in my mind, I'm thinking, no way I'm going to their church. I would be betraying Allah and my family, and I just can't do that. So I was really scared to even put my feet in a church building. In 2001, I met my wonderful husband of 19 years, and he invited me to his church. And I went with him. I thought about it, and I was like, I'll go, I'll try it out. And so I went in, and I don't know what happened. I was sitting there listening to the sermon, listening to the preacher, and this feeling that I have never felt in my life came over me. And it was just such peace. I felt like I was on a cloud. It was just so peaceful. I felt so good. And I remember leaving the church that day, and I'm like, what was that about? What was that? And so I just started going back, to church with him every Sunday. And eventually he proposed to me, and we went to see the pastor of that church. He was a good friend of my husband, and he said, hey, would you mind marrying us? And he said, well, which religion is she? And he's like, well, she's Muslim. And he's like, I'm sorry, I can't marry you. She would have to be a Christian. And we were both in shock. We're like, what do you mean you can't marry us, But so we went home, and my husband was, at the time, obviously he was my fiance, but at the time he was like, you know what? You don't have to become a Christian because of me. I love you, and no matter what, I'm gonna marry you. So, don't feel pressure to become a Christian because he's saying you need to be a Christian. And so I'm like, in my mind, I'm thinking, no worries there, But over time, I just started thinking about all the things that happened to me in the past, and all the people who've planted seeds in my life, and I was like, maybe I need to do this, And so I went to work the next day, and I had a really good friend of mine who was a Christian, a very good Christian woman. And I talked to her about what happened. She said, Karima, it looks like God is after you. He's been after you for a long time. And, I said, maybe you're right. So I went home, and my husband prayed for me. And so I decided to give my life to Christ. And it's the best thing I've ever done in my life. It's been 19 years now since I became a Christian, and I wouldn't change it for the world. Now, when I just became a Christian, I had to tell my family the big news. The first person I wanted to tell was my parents. And so I told my mom about it, and she said, no. You cannot be a Christian. You're Moroccan. And I said, Mom, being a Moroccan and be Christian is two different things. She's like, no. You're Moroccan, you're Muslim, that's it. I said, no, being Moroccan, it's my origin. It's where I was born Moroccan, But, being a Muslim it's a religion. It's okay for me to change my religion. If I feel that Christianity is the right way to go, it's okay to do that. And she didn't really understand it at first, and I didn't really know how to explain it to her because, to be honest, I was a new Christian. But after thinking about it and praying about it, I told her, I said, Mom, listen, I love you, and I love my family, and, I will always be a Moroccan. But I said, if I was to die today, you can't save me. As much as you love me and my family loves me, no one can save me. The only one who can intercede for me and save me is Jesus. And I believe in him. I believe that he came and he died for me. I believe that he came to save me from my sins. And, I said, it's my choice. I can't say no to him because you want me to. And I just felt like it was an individual choice. And for a long time, to be honest, I thought it was a family thing. I thought, okay, if my family is Muslim, I have to be Muslim. But no, it's not true. It's not true. When you die and you're right there in front of God, your parents, your family is not going to be there and say, oh, would you please let her in, let him in? No. Nobody can do that for you. It is an individual choice. You have to make that choice for yourself. And I finally understood that. And what I did in a loving way, I told my family about it, and eventually they accepted it, thankfully. I found a God who loves me unconditionally, and he loves you too. We don't have to be perfect. We don't have to follow a certain ritual. He loves us no matter what. All we have to do is believe. Remember that peace I was telling you about? I found it. I found that peace. I have it in my heart every day. I know where I'm going. I have purpose. My life is not perfect. I am still a sinner in need of his grace every single day. But when I come through a problem or a struggle, he's there to carry me through that. He's there with me. You know, I can come to him every morning and read his word and get encouragement and get guidance from it. I pray that this testimony would be helpful to you. I pray that it planted a seed in your heart. And I pray that you find the truth for yourself. Don't believe what I say. Buy a Bible, read it. You read it for yourself. And you find out the truth for yourself. It's there. Thank you so much for watching. Blessings to all and much love.